Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our very first Advice for Cloud webinar. I'm Jan-Hendrik Stricker, and together with Phil Burgess, we want to share our experience from almost 200 RISE with SAP engagements we've supported over the past 3 years. These insights don't come from theory or frameworks. They come from the field. They are real programs with real constraints, real people, and real consequences. Our objective today is simple: to help you avoid what consistently goes wrong, get the critical things right, and shorten the time it takes to create business value wherever you are in your RISE journey. This session exists because we kept on seeing the same patterns, even in very mature organizations. We are clearly living in a time of uncertainty, and for decision makers, that uncertainty translates into one very concrete pressure: the need to create value faster and more responsibly. In that context, RISE with SAP is not just an IT program. It's a long-term business commitment that shapes how strategy, technology, and people come together, often for 7 years or more. What we've learned is this: when you understand the common pitfalls of a RISE engagement early, you don't just avoid delays or budget overruns. You materially reduce time to value. And that matters not just for IT success, but for credibility, trust, and leadership accountability. In this session, we're going to share practical experiences from 198 RISE with SAP engagements. No theory. Isn't that right, Phil?
It is. As Jan said, it's based on real life engagement. And we aim to try and run through what we found on those 198 with the most common pitfalls, major root causes, and also maybe some suggested ideas to mitigate and try and avoid falling into those potholes. But I mean, it's obviously all based off real life experience, Jan. So why can we talk about this?
We will. Just quickly before we go into the depth here, just a brief introduction of who we are to our listeners. So at Advice for Cloud, we want to learn from practical experience and guide organizations through their cloud transformation journeys with clarity, structure, and purpose. We work at the intersection of strategy, governance, architecture, and value realization because cloud success lives in the overlap, not in silos. I focus on cloud strategy and governance, and Phil Burgess here with me today brings over 30 years of transformation and change leadership experience. Now, quickly, before we go deeper and share our insights, we want to make sure you understand where these insights actually come from and why we felt it was important actually to share those with you. Over the past 3 years, we've been closely involved in reviewing and supporting RISE with SAP engagements across industries, geographies, and organizational setups. Most of these were large organizations, and many were still in the early phases of their journey. What struck me very quickly was not how different these programs were, but how similar many of the challenges looked, even in organizations that were otherwise very mature. And that's what made us step back and look at this more systematically.
I think one of the things that struck me was that every environment's unique, Jan. I mean, every customer situation's unique. And the idea of one way of approaching it or one prescriptive approach is maybe a bit unrealistic, unless you take it as just a guideline. But we found recurring patterns of what tends to happen, no matter what. And I always think about what Mark Twain's supposed to have said, which is, I mean, history may not repeat itself, but it sure does echo. And I think there are certain underlying things that I've come across, not just in these 198, but over my experience as well. So I think the key thing is let's just have a look at the overall summary of what we found as common recurring items. So look, I mean, the fact is this 198, it's interesting because roughly about 2/3, 1/3, 2/3 were roughly of the engagements were at an early stage over this period of time. And a third of them were in sort of implementation and go live. So one of the other interesting things I think is that the actual retail and sequencing and scoring may well vary, or I would expect it to vary later as though that proportion sort of changes. What we did was we looked at the 198 and said, okay, well, what's the most overriding major single problem or incident or issue that we found in each one? So it could well be that certain engagements have got more than one of these, but we sort of percentaged it out based on what we thought the overriding screaming sort of issue that needed to be looked at was. And I mean, again, I think it will be that we find that it changes over time. And given my value hat, I think value realization is obviously interesting because I think early on people don't see it as an issue. But if you go live, all of a sudden, go live and after go live, all of a sudden it becomes a gigantic issue. So I think that sort of will sequence. But look, I'll pass back to Jan, and he can walk us through some of the detailed findings, okay?
Thanks, Phil. Customers tell us the same story, right? They say, the technical architecture that we're about to put in place, we don't see how this is actually going to support our business. And then change becomes difficult, right? Architecture grows complex. If you grow up with this uncertainty of what you actually want to achieve, where is business actually or business value brought to the users, to the organization, and in early setup decisions, these may create actually very long-term constraints. And instead of feeling in control, organizations worry about sustainability, integration risks, and system approaching end of maintenance. And that puts additional pressure, of course, on decision makers and on project organizations. The result is a growing gap between what the business needs and what the platform can reliably support. So about a quarter of the organizations we've reviewed reported those architecture challenges. Not exotic ones, but slow change requests, incorrect sizing, complex landscape, and integration constraints. And one very concrete example is actually about cloud capacity change requests. So this one is structural and most critical, because if you underestimate the sizing at an early stage of your project, correcting it later can take weeks, not days. And this, I have seen this taking direct impact on critical delivery timelines. Add to that maintenance deadlines and time pressure, and organizations often rush decisions, forgetting critical design and governance steps. So I think even from an outside-in perspective, right, we've looked at a bit of what other people say that haven't looked at those 200 RISE engagements at all. And well, we see this quote here from the ERP implementation research, which says that 83% of project reports, landscape setup issues. And this tells us that architecture is not just technical detail, it's actually a strategic enabler, or it can become a serious blocker. So let's look at the second issue we found. Customers feel they are moving to RISE without a shared understanding of why, how, and to what end actually. Many programs suffer not from lack of ambition, but from lack of shared and realistic direction. We often see organizations enter RISE because it feels inevitable, not because of the value case being clear. And roles and responsibilities are unclear. And almost every time we saw a customer adopting a passive attitude, expecting SAP or the partner to deliver RISE as a turnkey operation, the project governance was weak from the beginning. Things were decided almost above the customer's head, not because they wouldn't be able to follow up and through, but because they weren't involved. And no one could take responsibility of the actions taken. Business objectives are not anchored in solution capabilities. They are not prioritized or linked to a business case. And the transformation quietly turns into a technical exercise. And again, Gartner reinforces this view, right? 70% of ERP initiatives fail to meet their goal. And this is why the why of your RISE with SAP engagement matters so much. Without it, You cannot generate ROI. You can only generate cost. Phil, that should actually spark a reaction on your side.
You know me, I've always got a hot spot about ROI. I'm really interested in business value, but I think that's one of the key things I would say that came out. That, you know, the fact that, surprise, surprise, sometimes business people, and quite often business people, don't see the value in this kind of strategic move. And, you know, I think some of that is down to the fact that, you know, we need to engage them early. We need to keep them fed, okay, rather than sort of it becoming an IT technical project. I think the other thing that is really vitally important in these you know, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous sort of times is to make sure that actually we've got great flexibility and adaptability, and we drive everything on helping support the business. I think, yeah, I think, and I have for a long time now, the, you know, the era of the 170 million upfront, break even perhaps in 5 years with a fixed technical roadmap for the next 1700 years, it's gone, okay, and it should have gone a long time ago, and we all sort of recognize that. And yeah, the idea of coming up with a fixed way, a set way, a prescriptive, to use an SAP term, way of doing something when everybody's environment's different, it's just nonsense, okay? But look, don't start me on that. I'll talk a lot more about that later on, okay? So let's move on.
The third issue that was reported, well, that we saw, we could observe, was actually that it feels quite complex for customers to navigate in a changing, of course growing, but also very much changing SAP and partner ecosystem. Right? It feels complex and time consuming. And customers have frequently described their experience as navigating in a very fragmented ecosystem. And as much as I actually agree, putting myself in the customer's shoes, that it is sometimes quite complex and frustrating to get information, to just wait for people to show up, to help, to accompany. One should have in mind that especially over the past 3 years, SAP has undergone a very important and structural organizational change in the way they work, right? The operating model of SAP has become much more industrialized, automated, and actually services are delivered in a factory mode. So very industrialized. I mean, that's not inherently bad, right? Because it probably increases the quality and also SAP's capacity to deliver that quality on the spot. But it also changes the way that customers must engage. And we've seen many organizations struggle to understand actually in that context of who owns what, right? Where are the escalation paths? And how can I interact with partners or with SAP teams? And with that clarity, customers end up managing or feeling they need to manage the ecosystem instead of managing their own outcomes. And of course, that is an energy drain of energy that should be invested in transformation and ROI.
This story of an SAP bus has been ongoing for a while. And as you know, when I was at SAP, I had overall initial global responsibility and accountability for the ECSP program. And for large customers, that's what that was designed to address.
Enterprise Customer Success Partners, for those who wouldn't know.
That case, sorry. And that was what that role, that engagement management role, was there to actually address. Now, it sort of got unhooked to some extent and seems to be more and more, particularly as of the last 18 months, moving more backwards towards a traditional CIO, software, SAP, and IT focused sort of enterprise architect 2.0 role. And yeah, it's a little, I see it as a little disappointing. It's almost like, you know, you've seen your baby sort of not flourish, but it's a fact of life. It's much more focused on an internal, an SAP, and a CIO rather than a customer success role, in my view. But again, I'm biased. But anyway, I mean, bottom line is that would be the answer that some people would say to coordination, but it's becoming less and less so, I feel. But the key reality of life is sometimes a lot of this business is done from a commercial point of view, and it's the commercials that we have to navigate, isn't it, Jan?
So the commercial phase is probably what is the context in which customers and SAP talk first time about a cloud transformation, putting a question mark onto an existing ECC6 legacy, and then trying to envisage, so where could we go from where we are right now? It's in that dialogue that a lot of friction can be created. And we've listed here the reasons for that friction, and sometimes even loss in confidence into SAP's capability to deliver on their promise, right? For customers to understand, well, actually, what you're trying to sell me here, is that really going to bring the business I need to expect, and my business expects me to deliver, right? One of the most common examples was incorrect sizing. So how does this work? Let's look a bit into this one. So to make those deals work, and this I'm coming here from an SAP sales point of view, so to make those deals work, organizations sometimes accept assumptions they know are optimistic. And when I say organizations, I mean both on the SAP but also on the customer side. So that results in smaller sizing, simplified models, and unclear consumption of transparency. Now, what those two, the two teams on both sides of the table gets them to actually accept an unclear aspects of sizing? Well, it's oftentimes the pressure that comes from many sources, right? So it's on the one hand side, it's quota fulfillment. On the other hand, it's budget fulfillment. It's executive trust and sponsorship being potentially at stake because we need to keep deadlines, we need to keep promises. And again, this is happening on both sides, on the customer side, but also on SAP's end. And the consequences of that surface mostly only later. So these incorrect sizing, small t-shirt sizing results can result in performance issues, and then you need to perform root causes, and that causes delays. It results in change requests, and in the end, you have lost a lot of time during the first phases of your project, which are still most critical. That's not a matter of technology. With a cloud mindset behind, you'd say, you don't want to spend repairing mistakes from the beginning throughout the cloud contract lifecycle, but you'd rather want to create value for your business right from the start. Right? Add delayed visibility into cloud consumption, and billing complexity and trust starts to erode. Actually, only a few days ago, I found an interesting post on LinkedIn, somebody saying that SAP announces an extension of existing 9 tiers to 14 tiers. And some of the internauts left quite cynical comments on SAP, say, well, this is how SAP basically manages complexity, right?
Yeah, simplification through complexity
Exactly,
was one of my
right?
favorite comments.
But I'd say, okay, it's SAP has decided this, so it's out now. Question is, what as a customer, as a potential customer, what do I do with those announcements? Where do those lead me, those announcements? So I maybe should be analyzing the impact and the consequences of the extension from 9 to 14 tiers for my scoping exercise, for my contract negotiation, for my business case, or for my plan in terms of value realization and adoption. And I think this is where companies can use good and independent external advice, because that is not going to come from SAP. SAP will limit itself to the announcements. Now, Phil, this one talks about value realization gaps, and you mentioned earlier that this is it's here ranked number 5 amongst the 6 we're going to talk about today. I believe that you'd say, well, as soon as we move into a project realization phase, into adoption, this would probably move up to a much higher ranking level.
Yeah, but as a value evangelist, I
Yes.
would say that, wouldn't I?
You're
No,
expected to say so.
I mean, business value, and we deliver business value rather than IT projects, I've found has been a mantra since I first joined SAP in '96. And frankly, we still get IT projects. Okay. And you only need to read LinkedIn about, what's going wrong with projects, what's going right with projects. And to some extent, I mean, it's the scary number on this one is this, the lift and shift one that we found. That the vast majority of them are lift and shift. Basically, what I would classify as a technical upgrade. Okay. So based on TCO reduction normally. And you can look at that I mean, there are inbred agendas maybe on both sides. One is from an SAP point of view that it perhaps is perceived that it would reduce the lack or reduce the ability of somebody to go elsewhere. So that if you actually did a wider review of how can you get maximum value from this move, it could well be that you could take that as a customer and go to the market. So from an SAP point of view, it's very good that you throw somebody into the swimming pool. And from a customer's point of view, there's quite a few people in IT particularly with their futures and their backgrounds built on SAP. So it's sort of almost like a great movement to keep it in place. I think one of the key things that I find is this prescriptive framework of actually being there is only one way to do it, and it's a technical way quite often, so that you get things which drive maximum value only done later on, and that is a bit of an issue. I think business value, particularly in these environments, has to be planned for, and you have to have maximum flexibility and adaptability because that's what the real world out there is like at the moment. So more and more, I think you have to embed value early. You have to actually have that mindset, and you need to do it up front. And using value as a basis, it helps define. I mean, it puts the C-level business in the driving seat, which is a great place for them to be because we need to engage them and feed them. But the other thing I think it does, which Jan will talk about, is it also helps you define what can be a big challenge, which is, what data you need and what is needed, what isn't needed, and when. So I think it reflects into the data apart from anything else. And that, again, is
Great
found to be a big
segue
issue.
into this finding here. That's basically an uncertainty and risk around data in migration. And here, I think, again, that's independent from technology. The old rule still applies, right? Even with AI and with cloud, garbage in, garbage out, right? So we've observed that this question is consistently one of the highest risk areas. And it's at the same time a topic that IT people and business people have difficulties making words for and around. What we've seen is that the relevance of the data discussion and the actions emanating from those discussions, if they happen, comes actually with the pertinence of the business scenario. Right. So if we've seen in the previous slide, that little picture that shown is that if you start with your project delivery, you need to cross that bridge to go to value realization. This is actually also where the data strategy for customers is, right? It's anchored in the objective of realizing value for the business. Phil said it. It's many customers, most of the customers that we've been working with, have opted for a lift and shift approach. So it's basically taking all your current data or your customizing your code into the cloud, and then trying to make most sense out of it, trying to also clean up everything a bit later. but it actually fuzzes a lot around what you want to do actually with your data. Plus, we have seen and issues around data security, data sovereignty, all of these decisions actually that may well be also a reason for companies having chosen a lift and shift approach in the first place. But what we see actually is that a lot of companies retard their decision to go to the cloud also because of these data issues, right? And of course, then there's a lot of decisions that are still pending because they are hard to reverse, right? So once taken in the beginning, it's hard to reverse decisions on your future data architecture, on your migration strategy, right? And what we've seen is that makes, even though people have difficulties making words about it, we've seen people rather looking at data as a source of anxiety rather than a source of confidence, right? So our learning from this would be address the data early, the data topic, address it early, be honest about the effort it will take depending on the objectives, involve the business and make sure that you've checked all the boxes of your personal data management and migration strategy checklist before you take the next steps. So with this, I think we should start to wrap up. Actually, we'd like to give you an overview. We're talking about the patterns, right, that we've seen across organizations and across different maturity stages of the organizations. And these patterns that we've seen, they were very consistent across these engagements. First one is about timing. So most of the serious issues we see, they don't suddenly appear during an implementation. They actually originate much earlier, during discovery, during preparation, during an early decision making. So decisions that are taken under pressure at that stage often lock in consequences that are very difficult to reverse later. So again, here I think it's an implicit message to make sure that you have a thorough preparation of your project. You tick all the boxes of your personal checklist and then take the next steps. Phil, what do you think?
I think that's one of the key things. I think that also reflects in the three key things about governance, coordination, transparency. Really easy, great words to say, but they can be challenging to actually keep set up and also to keep the kind of level of discipline when things get quite tough and hard and challenging within a project or an implementation transformation. It's fascinating from that point of view that I mean where there's a lack of clarity, either things don't get done or things get done twice. So it's a simple sort of almost like motherhood and apple pie, but it's amazing how in the 198 how often that was still an issue. And it's not about lack of competence, and it's not really about it's more about the wrong kind of level of focus and discipline being put onto the structures. And I think to some extent, underlying that, there is this overriding expectation that cloud is the same as we've always done. It's exactly the same. And it doesn't require any sort of capability or anything else that is additional or to change. And I think that's one of the overriding messages that I would say, extrapolated from the findings, that cloud is not the same as a legacy project.
Absolutely. And I think cloud recalls us that, a lot of things that can go wrong in projects today, they are about governance, right? And that's independent of the fact that companies are leaving their on-premise legacy stack and go into the cloud. But compared to what it was 15, 20 years ago, when like these governance topics, that structural topics that we talk about, were somewhat optional, like with cloud, they become very much mandatory.
And I think the other thing is that they become even more important because you need to take a more flexible and adaptable approach to
Yeah.
an implementation now because of the environment that we're all living in. I mean, we've always said it really, but we've sort of given it back. But now it's critical for business survival, with all the changes that are happening. So that was just my thing. I think it's
Yeah,
even more
absolutely.
important now.
Okay, so with this, I think we've promised you at the beginning that we are going to do a summary and sharing practical experience in a way that shows how these challenges and their root causes are interdependent, and hence they produce oftentimes the impression of overly complex cloud transformation engagements, which of course, I think for good reasons, many customers shy a bit away from. And while the remedy, as you can probably see here from the overview, is not that one silver bullet, right? It's a combination of different things. And I insist to say, well, you need to make it your list of things that you want to look at, right? There's not this one thing that I've heard of. If I do it, it's going to be right. It's about things that also emanate, so things that you'll put on your list that emanate from your mindset, from your attitude, and also from the organization. It's more about these things than a long list of action items on a timeline, simply.
I think one of the things that strikes me, and I mean, the percentages are definite numbers. The others are things that, based on our experience, our knowledge of each one of these behind the scenes, we've put together, and they all contribute. But I mean, what's interesting is most of the issues aren't really technical. They're more to do with organization and people and potentially mindset. If you approach a cloud project with an old style sort of mentality and way of thinking, particularly in an environment that used to be, and a business environment that used to be actually more stable than it is now. I mean, it's always been changeable and challenging business, but now it's just absolutely insane. Then you won't get the value out of it, and you'll be wasting money, and you actually endanger the business. Even with AI, people are still the competitive advantage, and organizational flexibility and adaptability are essential in the current world. And one message that really hits me from the analysis we did on the 198 was, that clarity, flexibility drives value certainty. So, okay, it accelerates and maximizes value, but it's about certainty and, getting that value quickly, supporting the business. And that's what in IT, actually we should be about, supporting the business outcomes. And it's really a key leadership accountability challenge for anybody who's in the business and anybody who's in IT. We need to make sure that accountability is there, and we need to make sure that we cover and support. And the approach is easy to say, but quite often there are inherent agendas which sort of make people unwilling or less willing to actually adopt things and derive them with the discipline that they need to.
So what? Remember the patterns we've observed, right? So everything we shared today can actually come down to 3 reflections you may want to take back to your own organizations. So for the first one is basically about your real capacity to anticipate, not react, but anticipate, right? Before decisions are locked in and before flexibility disappears. A lot of the things that we have seen actually should recall that capacity to anticipate. The second question we'd like to leave you with is, how much flexibility do you want to design or have you designed into your future cloud estate? It starts with the commercial setup, it continues with your governance model, your architecture, and your organization. So how consciously are you actually protecting this? And third, and this is one of the often hardest, are you comfortable with adopting plans? right? Not changing direction all the time, but revisiting assumptions that as reality evolves without losing your objective, your clarity, or your intent. And because all those challenges companies experience, I want to help people. And this is actually my why and the why I have created Advice for Cloud. With great colleagues such as Phil, we help leaders stay in the driver's seat for cloud transformation, bringing clarity, foresight, and grounded delivery experience to decisions that truly matter.
Do the close. Go on.
So if you're interested,
Thanks.
So if you're,
thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your time. Yeah.
So thanks for listening. And if you're interested in this, you can get in touch anytime. Give us a call, send me an email, visit our website, or just ping us on LinkedIn. In the meantime, I would recommend you download from our resources space on the website a CIO Rise with SAP playbook with a bunch of interesting questions. So I look forward to hearing back from you. I wish you all a great day. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
That's good, right?
That'll do.